Sup, fellas? We're back with more Analyzer Pros. This is game 3 and the final game of the series between Gallon and Muzzy that took place in GM this week. We have Gallon with the Zoo Warlock yet again, as you see here from the last series, and Muzzy with Druid. Muzzy's Druid, Quest Druid. Couple of tech cards here and there, one mind control tech and one mossy horror, which potentially can land against Zoo. Both of them. Otherwise, looking, fairly what you'd expect. No Power of the Wilds is something to note as well, which is a card that can potentially help against early aggressive decks as just a body on the board. Worth noting that Muzzy doesn't run bees in his list either, so in terms of contesting early Zoo, not great. Just to give you an example of Mulligan win rates, this is a list of Zoo against Druid. Obviously Flame Imp at the top, Thrasher and Disease Vulture also pretty strong, with Flame Imp being the highest win rate. I think this particular page, the win rates are a little bit inflated than what they actually are, but still give you a good idea, the cards you're kind of looking for. It kind of makes sense, these cards here, because Druid itself doesn't really contest board too much, but it has a hard time removing a bunch of stats, and Flame Imp, Thrasher, Disease Vulture essentially are just offering a bunch of stats which Druid has a hard time removing. Things like, Crystallizer, Mekaru, they don't put much power onto the board, and they're weak to some of the AoE removals that Druid has. On the Druid end, Innovate, big one, lets you, complete your quest a bit quicker. Other than that, Starfall seems pretty good, and the Crystal Merchant, Anubis Defender, both cards you're looking for really in this matchup. Okay, so Mulligan time. We just about got Muzzy's Mulligan this time, as the card's flying away. Crystal Merchant was towards the top. It's definitely a card you want. Innovate would be a nice addition to this, so you can get a Crystal Merchant out early. But other than that, it seems just like keeping the Crystal Merchant, and obviously the quest is what Muzzy wants to be doing. For Gallon's end, Serpent Egg was okay in terms of Mulligan win rates from what we saw from that page, but he has no activator for it in hand. So with a on the coin and with a Flame Imp already, you could be looking at doing something like Flame Imp just on turn 1, and then coin for like 3s or something as a potential way of playing. So actually having a 2-drop isn't always that necessary. And given you've already got the strongest 1-drop, I feel like keeping a Serpent Egg with no activator doesn't really make a bunch of sense. And again, Crystallizers, they don't put much damage onto the board, so it's something you don't really want either. You really want to be looking for maybe the Disease Vultures and the Thrashers as well as your Flame Imp. So Serpent Egg, it's not a bad card to have in the matchup, but I think in this particular circumstance, with no activator, it's not something you really want. Okay, turn 1 for Gallon. Obviously, Muzzy was just playing the quest on 1. For Gallon, double Flame Imp, pretty much the nuts start that you can hope for. And he also picks up a Direwolf Alpha to follow it up for an incredibly aggressive start. And you see, you see Gallon give a bit of an eye roll there. It's like, okay, I got the nuts. We're not even going to have a game here, which is pretty much the case. So double Flame Imp, no real super punishes from Muzzy's side. If a Wrath does come down, it's going to, the quest isn't going to progress, and you still have another Flame Imp on board to follow up. This is a lot of pressure. For Muzzy, Innovate is probably the best draw in his deck. Allows him to Crystal Merchant and find another card draw. So looking for something potentially like Wrath for his next turn, and then maybe Loti on 4. Now Gallon, turn 2. Pretty simple, Direwolf Alpha to buff these to 4 attack and trade or go face. There isn't Power of the Wild in Muzzy's deck, so this 1/4 really doesn't actually threaten to kill any of your 2 health things other than the hero power. But you know, the 1/4 killing your direwolf and then your hero power hitting as well, and then this drawing another card, it's not something you really want in exchange for just pushing a bit of extra face damage this turn. So yeah, the trade I think is justified. This is like an ideal start for Gallon pretty much, even when Muzzy has a particularly good opener himself with the Crystal Merchant and the Innovate. Okay, for Muzzy's turn 3, it's really a big decision point in this game. Do you want to play Loti for the potential to copy it next turn? Or do you want to just hero power and go for completing your quest? It's really 2 ways for this game to play out. In terms of Loti's forms here, a 1/6 taunt, you know, gets value traded twice, which is something that Gallon probably not going to do. He's probably going to trade this one in because he might be a bit fearful of a swipe on turn 4 and like leaving everything on 1 health. You know, it doesn't seem that great against a swipe, so he might still take this 4/1 into 1/6 trade and then, you know, just value trade the direwolf to play around swipe a little bit if he can afford to play around it. Because, like, you know, if his hand's like just Cable Rat and a lackey and he doesn't get the any lackeys to play around a swipe, he might just take the value trade anyway, since a swipe will fall clear regardless. But yeah, the 1/6 taunt is just like, it's okay. It saves you a little bit of face damage, and then you can follow up with a 3/4 taunt next turn. But it's really, in terms of tempo, it's quite bad. And it's kind of saying, I'm just trying to save some health and then maybe get a Starfall to AoE clear the board on turn 5 or something, or a swipe that can clear up on turn 4 or 5 then. But the whole time you're doing that, you know, you're not going towards your quest. So even if you get that AoE clear, well, Gallon's going to redevelop onto the board and your hand's going to be like Nourish and Hidden Oasis, which are awful tempo tools if you've not completed your quest. So yeah, that doesn't feel like a great payoff. It does save you a bit of health total, but in terms of tempo, it's pretty awful. You can also rush Loti into maybe the Direwolf Alpha here to take off a lot of the power. This leaves Gallon with a 1 health minion still, and you can do this next turn at the very least. But with this 1 health minion on board, it means if you were to top deck a swipe next turn, it's going to be a lot more impactful because it's going to be killing off 2 minions instead of, you know, maybe 1, because Gallon's going to be actively trying to play around swipes as much as he can. So the advantage of rushing in here over the hero power this turn is that a swipe top deck is immediately a little bit better. I'm not huge on this line. I mean, it's a bit more like you take less face damage, but you don't go towards completing quests. And even if you do manage to, you know, neutralize the board and stabilize a little bit in terms of your life total, in terms of tempo beyond that, you know, your hand is just real garbage in terms of trying to contest a zoo board. So even if you manage to hit your AoE, it's very likely that Gallon's going to be able to develop a bunch of threats afterwards that you're not going to be able to deal with if you don't have that quest completed. So I don't think this is the greatest way to victory. In terms of hero power, can you afford to go with this? If you hero power here, you go up 1 life and then you take 4. So it's like -3, and you go to 23 here. And there's at least 6 power coming to you on the next turn. So you'll be on 17 life, facing down 6 power, and then whatever Gallon develops on his turn 3. Against that, what's your turn 4 looking like? It's probably the Loti to come down, either as a rush or a taunt, I imagine. If it comes down as a rush, it's only really killing this Direwolf, which isn't amazing. Something that is potentially a way back into this game is if you play Loti as at 1/6 against Gallon's turn 3 board, and we got to kind of hope that Gallon, because we're in such a bad spot, we got to kind of hope that Gallon hasn't got, you know, a particularly good turn 3. We're looking like we're hoping Gallon plays Gallon's hands full of expensive things, like maybe a Sea Giant in there, maybe a 4-drop. So we're hoping that Gallon does the turn 3, which involves something like, you know, 1-drop tap, or, you know, Cable Rat plus a bad Lackey or something like that. Something that's not really putting a lot of damage onto the board, and that might be a route back into the game. Because when you play this 1/6, you know, the 6 power from Gallon has to go into it. So you might still end up being around 17 health afterwards, but it might be a case where these 2 trades end up having to happen. Obviously, Gallon will try to play around the swipe a little bit if he can, but we might have to be a bit hopeful that he can't play around it and has to just develop stuff into the board like the Cable Rat or something, if that's what he has in hand. So this kind of thinking where you're like, okay, I'm in a bad spot. What needs to go right for me and what needs to go wrong for my opponent for me to win this game? So if we're imagining a situation where we do draw a swipe or a starfall on the next 2 turns, and our opponent can't play around it because their hand's full of, you know, Mecharoos or Sea Giants or whatever, it's going to be a case where these trades end up have to happen. These things go to 1 health. You do get to do a swipe. You're still progressing your quest, and your health total is not in massive amounts of danger. That is a legitimate way back into this game. Obviously, it's not very likely, but when we're in such a bad spot, we have to play to these sort of fringe routes to victory, because it really doesn't matter if Gallon ends up having a good turn here and we get blown out and lose that way, or if Gallon has an average turn and we take the wrong decision here and we still end up losing against, you know, that average result from Gallon. So it doesn't matter how much you win by. It also doesn't matter how much you lose by.
It don't matter if you win by an inch or a mile. Winning's winning.
The only important thing is finding that route to victory, and I think there is one here. Okay, Gallon's turn. 2 options really: Knife Juggler or Cable Rat, to be a bit mana efficient. The main thing you're thinking about here is swipe from Muzzy for turn 4 in terms of getting rid of stuff onto the board. There is an MC Tech in deck, so if you do go Knife Juggler, Abusive Sergeant, you open up MC Tech, but it's likely not good enough, even if you steal the best thing, which is probably either the Knife Juggler or the Flame Imp. You're still going to be in a reasonable spot, I would say. So in terms of what you want to do, you probably want to be pressing as most damage you can. You don't really want to go for the Cable Rat here because it just makes your board super weak to swipe, and if you hit something like Damage Lackey, Rush Lackey, Spell Lackey, you're not going to be able to avoid being weak to swipe. At least if you play like the Knife Juggler and the swipe does come down, you're going to still have this Flame Imp as a 3/1, and then you can follow up with stuff from there. So Knife Juggler, Abusive Sergeant seems like the play to put the most power onto board. Okay, so Muzzy's turn. I'm sure he likes seeing the Starfall here. In terms of what his plan was, it was to neutralize some of the threats with the low Ts and then AoE the board away and then maybe stabilize from there. But we see what's going to happen really here is that if Loti comes down here and then maybe even the next board all dies to this Starfall, you know, you're going to be on a low health total, and then your turn 6 is going to be looking like just healing yourself. And then where do you go from there? Because your quest is not going to be complete. Maybe you're going off for another top deck on either the next 2 turns for your turn 6, which is a bit better than healing, like maybe an Oasis Surger. But it's really kind of looking like you're not going to be getting this quest complete at any time soon, and you're going to really start to suffer in terms of tempo. I mean, it's certainly possible to hero power this turn. you ended up taking off the knife juggler with the Loti. Lets you clean up a bit more of the board. But if your plan is to just Starfall it all away next turn anyway, and just say hope that Gallon can't play around Starfall, you know, the hero power gives you +1 health, and you take 2 at least from the juggler, and plus whatever knife juggles hitting in face. But you do get the 1 quest reward, so it is certainly feasible here to just go for a hero power and just say that I need to clear the entire board with the Starfall next turn anyway. So playing the Loti here to save only a small bit of life, but also denying your quest, maybe isn't the correct play. Gallon's turn 4. Obviously Evil Recruiter can be played this turn, but it's a bit meh. I mean, when you're generating 2 lackeys, you really kind of want to get the value out of the Evil Recruiter on the next turn. So Cable Rat and Sinister Deal are probably going to be coming down in this turn instead. In terms of what lackey we want this turn, the plus health lackey is the only thing that really plays around Starfall here. The Faceless lackey also is potentially a way to do that if you get a bit lucky with what 2-drop you roll. But we're looking kind of like doing this trade and buffing the health of this Flame Imp here, and then Starfall becomes a bit awkward. We kind of have an inkling that there's no swipe in hand, because swipe was quite good on the previous turn for Muzzy, given there's this 3-1 Flame Imp, so you probably would have seen a swipe come down rather than the Loti. So we can kind of deduce there's no swipe in hand. Obviously you can be top decked, but you should probably play a little bit less around top deck outs rather than hand reads at this point. So in terms of ordering, we know what lackey we want, so Sinister Deal can find that, but we may as well start with the Evil Cable Rat, just on the off chance that we do hit the plus health lackey from the Cable Rat. That way we can choose our Sinister Deal to get us something better for the next turn, and we don't end up in a situation where we have 2 plus health lackeys when we only really need 1. In terms of these 3 lackeys, we're expecting our board to get somewhat wiped next turn. Rush lackey, Witchy lackey, not so great. So Spell lackey is, you know, fine. Probably want to see something like a damage lackey or a faceless instead, but this is probably the next best thing. Okay, for Muzzy's turn, a swipe would have been pretty juicy here. Unfortunately, we didn't draw on, but the Starfall is looking like the only play we have available. Either we AoE to clear, you know, the 1s, or we use the damage option to clear the biggest minion and the taunt away. Upside for killing the taunt is that your swipe top deck becomes potentially good again. We do know there's a lackey in hand. We're probably not going to beat lackey plus Evil Recruiter anyway, so it's not something we should be playing around. In terms of things we can beat, if Gallon has to go for a lackey next turn and there's all these 1 health things, and we do hit maybe our second Starfall or one of our swipes, then maybe we can AoE that board away and then start stabilizing from there. Or maybe we can hit something like our Mossy Horror as well, which is something we run as a one-off in our deck. So it does make sense, I think, to clear this Flame Imp, as it lends ourselves to better top decks and bigger tempo swings on the follow-up. It is a little bit weaker to Grim Rally, second Direwolf, that sort of thing, but it gives ourselves better routes. For Gallon's turn, Knife Juggler plus Evil Recruiter, bunch of power onto board, too many stats for Muzzy to deal with. We don't have to go for the Ethereal Lackey, since we have a Lackey on board, so it's a pretty clean, pretty obvious turn. So obviously you can hit an Oasis here to heal for 12, and that might maybe make you live, but Oasis Surger is just better tempo in terms of getting rid of, you know, the Juggler and this 3/3. Leaves you probably killing one of these as well. If you're not dead. You're not technically dead on board because there's going to be 7 power, but you're dead to any sort of damage, and it's looking like even it's game over. Because even if you don't die, like what did you do on the follow-up? Just Hidden Oasis to heal for 12. Maybe you draw a 0 mana 3/5 as well. That's like the best you can come up with, and that still doesn't seem good enough to win the game. For me, it's just like clean up pretty much. Gallon just trying to find lethal outs here, as he's so far ahead on board and it's going to still stay that way. And he does find it. So what is this game a good example of, really? Yes, one side got pretty much the absolute nut opener in terms of Gallon with the double flame imps. But from the other side, you have to kind of be identifying your route to victory, even if it is an incredibly slim chance of it happening. I think the route was the quest completion and finding an AoE on the way. Using the low T as a taunt on your turn 4, I think was acceptable because it did stop 6 damage and soften up the opposing board to a swipe or a starfall, whilst still completing your quests. So I think while Muzzy's Lion, it took off more power initially. It never opened up the window for a way to win the game, I don't think. I think you were just always going to be still taking a bunch of damage, of course, but then if it comes to like stabilizing for one turn, your follow-up beyond that is not going to be enough to compete with the tempo that the Zoo's going to be able to put onto board, and you're just going to be left in a situation where you lived, but you're not going to be able to get back onto board. It's very, very likely that Muzzy would have lost anyway because Gallon had such a strong opening hand. These sort of games are going to happen in Hearthstone where one side just gets a nut opener and you can't do anything about it. But the nature of a random set of games is that you're going to get these nut games where you're going to win and your opponent can't do anything just as often as they're going to get them. So they kind of cancel each other out in terms of win rate. What you should focus on is those games where decisions really do affect the outcome of the game, and still, playing as tightly and as correctly as you can, even in these scenarios where you have nut style openers, so you don't end up throwing away one of your guaranteed win sort of games. I hope you enjoyed this series between Gallon and Muzzy, both excellent players. Muzzy probably not his best day, but still a great player. Gallon joining the GM and showing he's got the chops to be in there. If you are watching any Hearthstone, competitive Hearthstone, and you find a game that you think is really interesting and maybe worthy of analysis, please do let me know because I can't watch all of them. So if you do find an interesting game, let me know about it either via Twitter or from YouTube comments, and I'll check it out and see if I can make a video on it. There'll be probably one of these a week, probably not 3 a week. I want to be exploring other sorts of videos as well, but I'll try and get at least one of these analysis videos out each week for you guys. My name is Jambre, thanks for watching, and catch you in the next one.